These verses that people proof text and take out of context and try to say that we don't have to keep the law and we're not under the law, it has nothing to do with the Ten Commandments, the law of God being abolished. Absolutely nothing. Let's take a look at Hebrews 8 and verse 10. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws into their mind and write them into their hearts. I will be to them a God, and they shall be to me a people. And they shall not teach every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. What is the difference between the old and new covenant? You know, it's an issue of locality where the laws are going to be written. Originally, they were written on tables of stone. And the letter of the law would only go so far. It really would. And I'm sure the self-righteous Pharisees of Jesus' day probably went around and said, well, I've never killed anybody. And I've never committed adultery. And you know, Jesus lifts the law to the spiritual level. You know, he said, you've heard it said of old time, don't kill. But I say unto you, if you are angry with your brother in your mind, in your heart, you're guilty of killing him. Jesus said, you know, you've heard of old time, don't commit adultery. But I say unto you, if you look upon a woman with lust, you're guilty of committing adultery. And you know, I know I've heard what guys say, you know, at least what they told me. A lot of guys have said, well, what man out there doesn't lust, doesn't undress a woman in his mind from time to time, you know? But you know what Jesus is saying is that all sin begins in the mind. Long before you go out and literally commit adultery, you've been thinking about it maybe a year in advance before it actually happens. What Jesus is saying is that all sin originates in the mind first. And then it's just a matter of time. As long as you keep obsessing on it, as long as you have that anger, that hatred, that lust, whatever you're thinking about, that sin in your head, it will come to action. Your body will, you know, this physical body will follow pursuit. It all depends on what's going on in the mind. So Jesus lifts the law to a spiritual level. You know, and if you think about it, people talk about, well, we keep the spirit of the law. We're not bound to the letter of the law. Well, which is more binding? You know, the letter of the law that says don't commit adultery, or Jesus who says, I want you to control the thoughts of your mind. To me, it seems the spirit of the law is more binding. Which is more binding? Don't kill? Okay, I've never killed anybody. But which is more binding? The letter of the law or the spirit that says, of the law, that says, if you're having thoughts of anger, you know, I don't get mad, I get even, you're guilty of killing. It seems to me the spirit of the law is even more binding than the letter. And so the new covenant is about it's about application, where these laws are going to be written. Originally, they were written on stone, tablets of stone. The letter of the law would only go so far. God not only wants us to keep the letter of the law, but he wants us to keep the law in our minds, the way you think. And so it's a matter of application. Where these laws are going to be written is what the new covenant is all about. God says, I will put my laws into their mind and I will write them in their hearts. It becomes a part of you, of who and what you are. And you cannot, as a Christian, go around saying, well, yeah, I keep the spirit of the law, but the letter has been abolished. What kind of nonsense is that? What kind of idiotic, crazed line of thinking is that? You know, we love our Jesus as long as we get to make up the rules as to how we will worship him. Yeah, that's so true. We love our Jesus as long as I get to decide how I will worship him. Yeah, I love him. No, that's not the way it works. God says, I'm going to write my laws into their hearts and to their minds. And of course, you're going to be obedient and do them. And when you fail, you've got the grace of God to forgive you. It's just that simple. But the law has not been abolished. The Ten Commandments have not been abolished.
Check us out on the web at isthatreallyinthebible.com.